So what's a proverb? I heard Bev say a wise saying. Who else? What's a proverb? I know questions right off the bat, too much for you in the morning. Steve Newton? A general truth. Very good. I don't think he means like the rank either. A general truth. Anybody else want to add to that? Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so a wise saying, a general truth. Oftentimes we think about some kind of now it's going nuts on me. Some kind of clever general saying, right? With wisdom. Is the Bible the exclusive owner of Proverbs? No, a lot of cultures have Proverbs. In fact, you might think of ancient Chinese Proverbs. There's a lot of those. Confucius says, right? That's not always the punchline to a joke. But there's a lot of cultures. The idea is like ancient wise sayings. So oftentimes when we think of Proverbs, we think of that sort of that little, I don't want to say cliff notes, but that snippet of wisdom, right? You think about, well, it's this wise saying or this wise thought, which is accurate, but when you think about the book of Proverbs, there's a lot more than just these short wise sayings. In fact, the way we're going to go throughout this winter semester, Lord willing, is the bulk of it will be from those short wise sayings, grouped into areas of thought. So the men that will be teaching from class to class will be presenting what the Proverbs have to say on, let's say, wealth or work ethic. But the book itself has a lot more to it. In fact, a general outline, which I don't have a slide, but a general outline, and you can differ with this a little bit, is chapters 1 through 9 really is the introduction to the entire book. So chapter 1 through 9, you're not necessarily going to find just little one-off statements. There's a lot of thoughts that progress and build on each other. And then from chapters 10 to 29 is where you have hundreds of Proverbs, where you have much more of these general statements of wisdom. And then at the end, in chapters 30 and 31, you have two men. It's a summary conclusion through examples. You have chapter 30 where someone is sort of applying and looking at the scripture to find wisdom. And then in chapter 31, you have Lemuel, the king Lemuel, who is telling you what his mother taught him. And then you have this example of what it looks like to be a wise, specifically woman, in chapter 31. So this morning, what we're going to be doing is we're really focusing on chapters 1 through 9. Again, we're not reading that whole thing and breaking all that off. But we're going to get to 1 through 9 and sort of introduce the book. And then from class to class, different men will come up with different subjects and sort of take us through the Proverbs. And then again, Lord willing, our final class, Matt Hodge is going to summarize and conclude, focusing on 30 and 31, but also trying to capture, he's got the fun job, trying to capture everything that we've sort of pulled away and learned from our winter series. So go ahead and turn to Proverbs chapter 1 and we'll get started. Proverbs chapter 1. Let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 6 to begin with. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth, knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel, to understand a proverb and to figure the words of the wise and their riddles. Don't worry, we'll get to verse 7 in just a minute. What is it that we know about Solomon, and why is he connected to this whole idea of wisdom? This is not a trick question. Let's go back to Sunday School 101. Go ahead, Scott.
He asked for wisdom and was granted.
Yeah, so we may not all be familiar with that story, but God, when Solomon becomes king, God lays out, ask for anything you want. And Solomon, looking at himself and the task before him, says a very wise thing. He says, I need wisdom to lead your people. Okay, so then we have that. What else do we know about Solomon and wisdom? So we have that, Solomon asking for wisdom and God giving him wisdom. What else? Kevin? Yeah, we see him portrayed as the wisest. In fact, we have people coming from afar to behold, and they're like, wow, there's something different about him. Jeff?
He had it and often didn't.
Yeah, we also see that he had it, But that doesn't necessarily mean that he applied it to his own life all the time, right? Because we see in Solomon's life a lot of choices that we would go, that doesn't really agree with the wisdom of God. What else do we know about wisdom? Or Solomon? Go ahead, Luke.
In his other document, Ecclesiastes, he documents his experience in the pursuit of everything, culminates in his understanding.
Yeah, so Ecclesiastes sort of looks and it sort of gets you into his mind and how he's pursuing those things to understand more greatly. And then we also have, for instance, I think it's 1 Kings 4, where it talks about how he collected and he learned. So it wasn't just that Solomon was exuding all the wisdom. He was observing and learning and then collecting. So I don't want you to think that it all sprang from him, like everything was inspired directly. I mean, a lot of that wisdom was him observing and collecting. In fact, when you think of Solomon, as Jews think of Solomon, they look at him as the fountainhead of ancient wisdom, right? Not necessarily, and you'll even see in the book of Proverbs, not everything is Solomon, but everything is sort of in that vein of Israel's ancient wisdom, the collective ancient wisdom of Israel. Scott, go ahead.
Another thing about Solomon is he shared what he knew. When I see or hear about an old person dying, I think, what a shame, all the experiences and knowledge that they have is gone. But if they shared it for future generations, then that's really impressive. And that's what Solomon did.
Yeah, there's absolutely sharing of that wisdom, not just getting it and hoarding it to yourself, right? Okay, so, Steve, go ahead. Yeah, so a lot of instruction from his own father, from David as well. Absolutely. Okay, now look, I've got the verse up there, but notice he says, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity. Notice he says to receive instruction in wise behavior. We sometimes think, inappropriately so, that wisdom is knowledge. And yes, knowledge is part of wisdom, but it's more than that, isn't it? In fact, if you go back, you can turn here if you want, in Exodus 31. I want you to see how this is wording. In Exodus 31, beginning in verse 1, he says, Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, See, I have called by name Bezalel, you'll get it, the son of Uri and the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God and wisdom and understanding and knowledge and in all kinds of craftsmanship to make artistic designs for work in gold, in silver, and in bronze. This is just one place where this idea, that Hebrew word for wisdom that's used in the Proverbs so often, is attached to skills of some kind. Okay, so it's not just, I know a lot. And it's not just I observe a lot and then can speak to it. It's a applied knowledge. John?
I may be wrong, but I always thought that wisdom was application knowledge.
Yeah, it's applied knowledge, exactly. That's the idea. So there's a skill. So we think, sometimes we have the mistake of thinking wisdom is really smart people, right? But that craftsman who may not have any book learning, but can take a piece of wood and turn it into a piece of art or a piece of furniture or something like that, that's wisdom. There's skill there, right? So there's a skill aspect to it as well, okay? So as we think about Proverbs, as we go through this winter series, what I want us to think about is this idea of developing practical skills for living in God's world. Okay, that's the idea. Practical skills for living in God's world. Now that's going to start up here, where we think and we ponder and we perceive the end of things, the outcomes of choices, the outcomes of behavior and conduct. We observe what we know about the world and what we've seen in our own experience. But the whole idea is to develop those practical skills day to day. The decisions I make, what I do with my mind and my tongue and my resources and my conduct, what I do and how I live in God's world. Okay, now go back to chapter 1 again if you haven't turned back there. Look at verse 7. So you got that idea of wisdom, But you also have there in verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now, I'm not going to, you'll see, it's small there, but you'll see that's just in these first 9 chapters, minus 1, because I'm going to show you that verse in a second. 1:29, 2:5, 8:13, and 9:10 are all places where that fear of the Lord is used. What is that idea of fear of the Lord? So we take this idea of wisdom, which is this applied knowledge, right? This developing these practical skills for living in God's world, and we add the fear of the Lord. What component does that add to it? Or what is fear of the Lord? Motivation? Respect? Obedience? Awe and reverence is one idea. John?
Those qualities that you mentioned then create an open mind or heart where we can be receptive to things.
Yeah. In fact, let's go ahead and turn to Proverbs. I'm looking at John. Proverbs chapter 3. Look at Proverbs chapter 3, and I'll put it on the board, but go ahead and turn there too. So this is one of those other places where, look at this idea. Proverbs 3, verse 5 through 7. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Because what is, in this text, what is fearing the Lord set against or set opposed to?
Practicing evil. I think fear of the Lord is the recognition that God can punish you for your evil that you do. And so if that prompts all these other attitudes, then it will certainly motivate you not to do evil.
Yeah, so there's absolutely this aspect of fearing the Lord, understanding that there can be consequences. God can hold us accountable, will hold us accountable. Right? There's consequences. So there's absolutely this, somebody said it's a motivator, I think, right? Also look in verse 8 or verse 7, do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord. There's also this it's set against this idea of I understand, I know what's right. Okay, so you take wisdom, this idea of applied knowledge, and you add this fear of the Lord, this reverence and awe, this fear of who he is. It gets to the idea that there is an expectation of moral conduct. There is an expectation of right and wrong, to Matt's point, good and evil. And am I the one who gets to decide what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil? Do I get to decide what moral conduct looks like? No, it puts me in my place. That's why that fear, like Matt said, that fear of consequence is connected to reverence and awe, because God is the one who can put me in my place. Right? So there's that aspect there. Sorry, Derek, I blew by your hand. Go ahead.
Oh, just remind me of Judges, they did blood right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
You know, Israel proved that you can justify all your actions by your own wisdom, but God says the truth and he says the direction. He makes your path straight.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you take this idea of wisdom and connect it to this idea of fear of the Lord, then hopefully we're approaching all of this with this humility of, I don't know what the right way is all the time. And I don't get to decide what the right way is all the time. And in my place in this big, huge, massive universe, last Sunday, that sermon about Job, that's sort of one of the things Job learned, right? My place in this big, massive universe is just to sit and observe and learn from the one, the source of all wisdom, right? And so we sort of see this connection of, and so the journey we're going to be on, to a certain extent, is putting up how I think it should be done, or how I've done it, or how I have observed people have done it, and go, is that the way God wants it to be done? And having the humility when, you know what, God's way seems hard, seems challenging, or just sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes on the surface it doesn't even make sense. And by the rules of this world and this culture, what God wants me to do doesn't always make sense. But do we have the humility and the fear and the reverence and the awe to go, all right, true wisdom starts with fearing the Lord and understanding my place in light of who he is. Kevin?
Just one more way to say it. It's also inferring that God will hold us accountable for our actions. There will be a judgment
Yeah, they're absolutely. And one of the things, and we're going to get to this in just a moment, because he deals with it extensively in chapters 1 through 9, is that there is a consequence for wickedness. There is a consequence for foolishness. There is accountability. Absolutely. Okay. All right, as we go into chapters 1 through 9, and this is, again, one way, and I'm more than happy for somebody who's studied Proverbs. I know there's many that have studied it longer and more in depth than I have. If you've got a different way, feel free to bring it up. But the first 9 chapters, you can divide it into 10 speeches of a father to a son and 4 poems. And the 4 poems take on the form, wisdom takes on the form of a woman, the Lady Wisdom with these poems. And there's mingling of thought, but there's some pretty distinct different lines of thought with each one. We're not going to go through every one. We're going to sort of hit some of the highlights, okay? But you have 4 speeches of a father to, 10 speeches of a father to a son, okay? And I've got, if you can see that, that's sort of all the where it's divided out. So I'll read that. So and we're going to read the beginnings of a lot of these. Chapter 1, 8 through 19, chapter 2, 1 through 22, chapter 3, 1 through 12, and then chapter 3, 21 through 35, chapter 4, 1 through 19, and then chapter 4, 20 through 27. All of chapter 4, but it's sort of broken up into these 2 different speeches. Then all of chapter 5 is a speech, and then chapter 6, 1 through 19, and then 20 through 35, and then all of chapter 7. Okay, so that's one way to break it out, the 10 different speeches. Let's look at just some of the beginnings of these. So go ahead and go to chapter 2. We're going to read some of the beginnings. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through, and I'll tell you which ones I'm going to, and I'll try to pause so you have time to turn to look with your own eyes at the text. But I'm going to read each one, and what I want you to listen for are those repeating thoughts, repeating words, okay? So this is not the introduction to all of the 10 speeches, but it's to most of them. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. My son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. For if you cry for discernment, lift your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. Chapter 3, 1 through 2. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace he will add to you. Chapter 4, 1 and 2. Hear, O son, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding. For I give you sound teaching. Do not abandon my instruction. Chapter 4, verse 20 through 23, if I can read my handwriting. My son, give attention to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your spirit. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to all their body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life. Chapter 5, 1 and 2. My son, give attention to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion, your lips may reserve knowledge. Chapter 6, verse 20 through 22. My son, observe the commandment of your father, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart, tie them around your neck. When you walk about, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk with you. And then finally, chapter 7, 1 through 4. My son, keep my words and treasure my commandments within you. Keep my commandments and live, and my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your intimate friend. Okay, what similarities, what repeated words, what's the repeated feelings that come from all those, and that wasn't the introduction to every single, but the bulk, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. I counted too quickly. I think it was 7. 7 of the 10 speeches. What'd you hear? What was repeated? What was a theme? What jumped out? Listen. Over and over. Different words for it, but the same idea. Pay attention. Don't forget. Listen. Be attentive. John? Keep. Keep, there was a listen and do, right? Listen and apply, listen and act. Okay, what else? Seek. Yeah, there's this urge. I've got seek, I've also got pursue. Right? This idea of seeking, pursuing these things. So it's not passive, just sitting and waiting. Oh, there sounds like wisdom. Okay, I'll do that one. This seeking, pursuing. Steve?
Yeah, the first passage we read in chapter 2, and I appreciate you mentioning seeking, because in the first 6 verses, I underline all the active things to know, to incline, to perceive, to hear. It's not just be learning from my mistakes and saying, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I heard a phrase, a foolish person doesn't learn from their mistakes. A more intuitive person will learn from other people's mistakes. No, will learn from their own mistakes. But a wise person will learn from other people's mistakes. Be more active and pursuing and seeing the blessing and the results from that.
Yeah, so active pursuing, and then Steve added also the if-then. And I didn't get, there's a few of them that absolutely, there will be life, there will be this, like that, then this will happen. Now, if you go further in the text, there's a lot more of that, and on the opposite side too. If you're foolish and you're evil, this will happen. Okay. What else? There's also another theme, at least one more that I've gotten written down. Christine? Gain understanding. What do you mean by that? Yeah, and the idea is, and this may be what Christine meant, but the idea is there's a cumulative effect as well. You're gaining, but then the gaining is to what? To apply to avoid, right? As you're gaining understanding, you're avoiding or you're purposefully walking on the paths of righteousness, right? So there's this using it and gaining it, and then all of a sudden you can become a source of wisdom for other people, right? Scott and then Luke.
There's a relationship. He says, my son, in every one of these. If a father doesn't own his son, doesn't claim him, there's no relationship. And that's really important for a child to know that dad wants them.
Yeah, that really, and going back to Steve Presune's comment earlier, that he even refers to my father taught me these things. So you have that relationship between Solomon and David, but then Solomon and his son as well. There's a relationship there. Luke?
It's not an emotionless drive pursuit. You mentioned the idea of treasuring it. So as you're acquiring this knowledge, you understand its value. And that also changes it.
Yeah, there's the idea of treasuring it, and we're going to see that with Lady Wisdom gets to that too, this idea of value to it. And Luke's getting to one other word that was mentioned at least 2 or 3 times. Kevin? Heart. Right, Matt, was that yours? You got a different one. I'll come to you in a second then. Heart. Treasure them in your heart. Pursue these with your heart. I'm trying to look. I didn't write down. I think it may have been chapter 7. Bind them, verse 3. Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Look at verse... where was the one that talks about out of the heart comes the springs of life? I didn't make a note of that. But there's that one too. Like you guard these in your heart because out of the heart flows the springs of life. What's that idea of heart add to this concept? I think it gets to sort of what Luke was talking about, treasuring and not just a academic pursuit. What happens when we put something in our heart? John? You care about it? Invested, right? It's more than just, yeah, that makes sense. Connie? It comes out in your actions, right? So you've treasured it, it's who you are, you're identifying with it, right? What's in the heart comes out. Or as a simpler way to put it, what's in the well comes up in the bucket. Right? And so if those are the things you're holding dear, you're cherishing, you're treasuring, that's what your heart's consumed with, then those will flow out. Steve Newton? 423. Thank you. Matt, you had something. Oh, okay. So all those things. So do you get any kind of sense of urgency, or is this just like sort of general, hey, here's some advice, right? Like Derek and Tara are going to come to me and say, Andy, in the future, if you're ever going to buy a house, here's some general advice. I'm not looking for one now. They know that. But you know what? They've got a lot of wisdom and experience, right? So Is that the feeling you get, or what feeling do you get? There's more of an urgency, isn't there? There's more of an urgency. I'm going to speak to fathers. Fathers, when you have children, what is one of the drivers for you teaching your children? Why, and sometimes even somewhat aggressively, what drives us oftentimes in teaching our children? Love. Derek?
We don't want them to make the same mistakes we did.
There's a fear as well of them making the same mistakes. Again, some of you you may be too young to even relate to this. Some of you, it's going to be right up your alley, and some of you are just going to think I'm mushy. But we'll watch Little House on the Prairie. Anybody watch Little House on the Prairie? My freshman year, my roommate, who I didn't know, we had a bonding moment about 4 weeks in where we're sitting there between classes, flipping through the channels. Little House is on, and he paused. He sort of looks at me. These are two guys, right? I'm like, I'm okay with it if you are. And then it became our regular day. We love some Little House on the Prairie. But if you know Little House on the Prairie, there's these moments when Charles gets angry. And in just about every moment when Charles gets angry, you can trace back what he's scared of. There's some fear, and it's usually a fear for his family. But if you're still watching Little House, go back and see if almost every time Charles gets angry, you see some fear, underlying fear that's driving that. And so fathers to a son, why is it that there's that passion at times? Because we don't want them to make our mistakes. And so you sort of get this idea, the way it's worded, that there is this sense of urgency, this sense of, you know what, now, while there's time. Listen to wisdom, pursue wisdom, seek wisdom, take these things, put them in your heart, pay attention. Any other observations before we move on to lady wisdom? Mark?
Not just urgency, but also an element of permanence. This is not something that you do when you feel like it. This is not something that you wait for the time to arise to apply these things. This is something that is an ongoing. I feel like I think each of us are talking about the teaching. Listen to my teachings. I don't think that's necessarily saying listen to or read what I have right here. This is a general life commentary of pay attention to what's going on here, because this is something that needs to be ongoing.
Thank you. It's something that needs to be ongoing. That's an important element. Thank you very much, because I may have overlooked that, may have thought we implied that. Sometimes urgency can be the moment now, the passion, the excitement. That's not what you're getting from this, is it? You're making a choice about what is the direction of your life. So there's urgency with this idea of, for the purpose of setting the course of a life, a permanent pursuit, a constant pursuit. Here's the direction, right? And I think that's the urgency that we have sometimes as fathers is, that mistake could lead to this, could lead to this, and we see way down here where it might lead, and the kid's just like, it doesn't matter, I'm just making this choice right now. And so there's urgency, but with this direction of life, this permanency, this is what your life is defined by. Excellent ad. Thank you, Mark. All right. We didn't look at all these passages, but there are, it got to a couple of them as we read some of those introductions of speeches. But you'll find, and this is something I think we expect from Proverbs, but you'll find a lot of places where there's this, one way to look at it is moral logic, right? Where if you pursue wisdom, and if you're led by wisdom and the fear of the Lord, then we're going to see goodness and honesty and generosity. And you can add a lot of other words. I just didn't want the box to be that big. You're going to see goodness and honesty and generosity. You're going to see those things that characterize your life, and that will lead to success and peace, or any other, there's different words, life and peace, right? That's the moral logic. On the other hand, evil and foolishness, that's the pursuit, then you're going to see pride and selfishness, and again, put other words in there, but you're going to see your life is going to be characterized by pride and selfishness and dishonesty and all that sort of thing. And what's going to happen? It's going to lead to shame and ruin. Okay, I don't want you to answer this. Answer it in your head. This is moral logic. That's one way to put it. Are these absolutes? We're going to get to that in a minute. Are these absolutes? For instance, in chapter 10, verse 27, the fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. So there's never been a wicked person over the age of, that age gets longer and older and older for me as I get older, over the age of 80. There's no old person that's wicked. All you older people, we know you're righteous just because you're older. Okay, some of you are saying, yeah, duh, Andy, but I just want to plant that seed because there's a lot of statements just like that. Us parents, what's the one that bring up your children the way they should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it? There's a lot of statements like that. We want to deal with that, okay? We're going to wait till we look at Lady Wisdom for a minute, okay? But just ask that, with this moral logic in front of you, ask that question. Okay, let's quickly, and again, I'm not going to get into all of it. I'm just going to try to summarize to a certain extent some of the content that Lady Wisdom brings about. So go ahead and turn to chapter 1. Chapter 1. So as Lady Wisdom comes up, you're going to see a lot of these ideas. And in chapter 8, verse 1 through 3 is on there, and this is similar. But, I'll just read that, what's on the screen, and then we'll go to chapter 1 again. Does not wisdom call, and understanding lift up her voice? On the top of the heights beside the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, at the opening of the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out. Look at chapter 1, verse 20. Wisdom shouts in the street, she lifts her voice in the square. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she utters her sayings. Okay, you could look at chapter 9. It's interesting in verse 9, she's building this house, but in chapter 9, verse 3, it says, she has sent out her maidens, she calls from the tops of the heights of the city. And I should pause, I'm getting ahead of myself. Again, on the board is the sections, those little numbers, that's the 4 poems. So you've got chapter 1, 20 through 33, chapter 3, 13 through 20, chapter 8, and all of chapter 9, just for reference. Okay, but what you got chapter 8, 1 through 3 on the screen there. What else did we read? What is one of the aspects of Lady Wisdom? What's the picture that's being presented pretty consistently in these poems? Luke?
This mysterious, secretive, inner way thing. She's very public.
Yeah, in the inner closet, behind the hidden door, in the house behind, deep in the woods. After the journey over the long mountain and through it's not this, you got to struggle and climb up the mountain, seek the guru, and hopefully the door's open, and hopefully they're there and they'll see you. She cries out. She's shouting. John, you look like your hand's about to go up, so I'm going to preempt it.
I just think that she's a proclaimer. She's a herald.
Yeah, she's a herald. She's a proclaimer. And one of the things, and we're not going to get to these specifics, but one of the things you'll see in these poems on wisdom is they'll point to wise things. Like you see the wise judgment. I'm there, she'll say. You'll see the generosity. She says, I'm there. That's how it's being proclaimed. When you see people like them, she says, when God created, I was there. So in creation itself, Lady Wisdom is there. We understand it's God's wit, but that's how it's being personified, right? But it's crying out, it's everywhere. Anything else on this or what's the idea of at the gates? That's used twice. Oh, go ahead, John.
Where people met most often.
Yeah.
The elders of the city would meet at the gates at times.
Yeah, and why would they meet there? Because hopefully that's where wisdom is being shared, right? I mean, it's an intersection, right? And people would come and they would meet. And the idea is it's accessible. It's there. She's crying out. It's not this hard thing to find, which to our shame, when we act foolishly, when we pursue our own course, it's not because wisdom wasn't available shouting to us, right? So there's that aspect. Anything else before I move on to one of the next ones? Luke?
I think this is reading into it, but as far as tone, again, conveys that urgency. She desperately wants.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely does. There's this urge, like it's not like, hey, I'm available 10 to 2 on. No, I'm there screaming for you. Scott?
Just wondering about the female aspect of this. Is there some underlying thing about wisdom being like the help lead to man
all I can answer is from my understanding of Proverbs. That aspect I had never even thought of, so now I got something to go and meditate on, which is good. Notice in chapter 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Oh, I'm sorry, verse 8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Okay, so you got father and mother there. Then when you go to chapter 31, notice how chapter 31, the words of the king Lemuel, the oracle, which his mother taught him, and then you have what a wise woman looks like. There's a bookend effect, which I don't know if Matt's going to conclude. I don't know if he's going to deal with this or not, but there's a bookend effect of, here's what Lemuel's telling the teaching of his mother, and he gives you this demonstration of what a wise woman looks like. Wisdom in action, applied knowledge, and then Lady Wisdom at the beginning. So you sort of have these bookends. So from the book of Proverbs, I think that's the purpose. Whether there's more to it than that, I hadn't thought about that aspect of it. That's interesting as well. I think it's also neat that within Proverbs itself, we'll get into some of these, sometimes it's the shame to his mother. There's a mother and father aspect to raising a child in wisdom. We know that. And so I think maybe that's part of it too. Kevin?
Something I only learned more recently in a couple years is another theme or thread to see all the Proverbs in is to which woman are you going to pursue? The one
That's a good point.
the Lady of Wisdom, we see Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman, but she's not alone. We see a lot of the son, the father telling the son, watch out, choose the right woman, because she's not alone. Chapter 9:13, it says, the woman of folly is boisterous. She is naive and knows nothing. She sits at the doorway of her house on the seat on the high places of the city, calling to those who pass by, Lord, making their path straight. Whoever is naive, let him turn an ear, and to him who lacks understanding, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. So she's also calling out.
Yeah, chapter 7 also, there's a lot of it, but the adulterous woman you'll see in here. So that's a good point. I think that's a big part of it as well, is that there you've got the woman of wisdom and you've got the adulteress pictured. And it's like, which woman? They're both calling out. They're both drawing attention to themselves. Which one are you going to follow? So I think that's a big part of it too. Luke? Oh, man.
The fact that he's speaking to his son, and so which one are you going to
Yeah, which one are you having a relationship with? Exactly. Okay, we're going to have to fly through some of this, but it's okay. This is from chapter 9, verse 4 through 6. You also have this idea in chapter 1, 22 through 23, chapter 8, 4 through 6. Whoever is naive, let him turn and hear. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come, eat of my food and drink of the wine I have mixed. Forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. You notice that moral logic is in a lot of the things she's saying as well. If you look at the chapter 1, after it says she's shouting, what she actually says in verse 22, what's she shouting from the rooftops? How long, O naive ones, will you love being simple-minded? Okay, you also see this word naive used multiple times. That's who Lady Wisdom's crying out to. She's calling out, saying, naive ones, simple-minded ones. Okay? I would have loved to have gotten a lot of audience participation to explore that idea, but the clock is ticking. The idea is that just... So is it just young people? I mean, oftentimes we associate that with naive. What's naive mean? I'll ask that question. Lack of knowledge or inexperienced. Okay? Go ahead. Too much ambition, right? You're overshooting what you're capable of. That's actually an interesting part of naive, right? But we all have some naivete in us depending on our experience and what we're approaching, right? You can have the wisest single man is still naive when he gets married for the first time, right? So notice there's this idea of not being okay with being simple-minded, not being okay with being naive, that there's this expectation of growth in these statements, as she calls out. All right, and we can explore that further. I already talked to this a little bit, so I won't get into it, but there in chapter 3, for her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her gain better than fine gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her. The idea of, why are you pursuing Lady Wisdom? Because she's more valuable than anything else you could pursue. Okay, you have that value add as well. And then you have this concept as well, is that we ignore Lady Wisdom to our own peril. She's everywhere. She's abundantly available. She's crying out. She's seeking. She's saying, come on, come and eat from my table and learn from me. But yet, we ignore her to our peril. And the wording is somewhat cruel there in chapter 1. It says, I will laugh at your calamity. Wisdom will laugh at your calamity. If you ignore me and you reap what you sow, then it is what it is. So let's quickly deal with this idea of moral logic. So passages like the wicked's life, those who fear God, they're going to have prolonged life. The wicked is going to be a short life. Train up a children the way. These apps. How do we deal with that? See Job. And that's actually a pretty good answer. Because remember, Proverbs are probabilities. They're not promises. We got to take the wisdom literature for what it is. The Proverbs are probabilities. They're not promises. Number 2, Proverbs is dealing with the general rule, not the exception. You want to look at the exception, see Ecclesiastes, see Job. To get all of the wisdom literature picture, you have to take Proverbs in conjunction with Ecclesiastes, in conjunction with Job. So as we approach it, these are general rules. They're going to hold true often. But the world is what did we learn from Job? The world is way too complex. And that's just not how everything always plays out. All right, so what I want to urge us as we oh man, I promise my formatting was correct. That bugs me. I mean, it really bugs me. Maybe that's something I need to deal with. This is the plan, right? This is the plan. As we look at chapters 10 through 29, we're going to look at work ethic and wealth. Dan Alball is going to tackle that. Integrity and honesty, Eric Jones is going to tackle that. Words and the tongue, Mr. Bill Hodge is going to tackle that. Anger and strife, John Christian. Pride, Stephen Griffey is going to tackle that. And counsel and discipline, Scott McAfee. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Matt's going to sort of sum things up. Reality is Proverbs deals with a lot more than that. Those are some heavy themes through those Proverbs, but it deals with a lot more than that. My urge to us, my urge to myself and to you is, are we approaching this with humility, reverence and awe, understanding my place in this big, big, wide universe, with humility, understanding that in a lot of ways I'm still naive, and then am I willing to put everything else aside and pursue wisdom with the urgency so that I can gain, so that I can grow, so that I can become one of those people that becomes a fountainhead of God's wisdom for others. That's the urgency at which we need to approach our study. What can we learn about these things, and how can we apply them? Applied knowledge. Thank you for your time.